Hey everyone, and welcome to In the Arena, where we bring together the builders and thinkers shaping the frontier of AI and crypto. I am Derek. I'm head of DevRel for Recall, and today I'm joined by David Johnston. You are one of the
Hey
most
guys,
respected pioneers in decentralized systems. How are you doing, David?
I'm doing pretty well. I was up here in New York for Summit and got to hang out with a lot of friends. So headed back to Austin today, but life is good, man.
Great. Yeah, thanks for taking the time to join us. For people who don't know, David coined the term DApps, as in decentralized apps, back in 2013. So I myself got in this space kind of 2020 bull run on the smart contract side. So it was like how to build DApp. So to know that has its lineage and you coining the phrase is like, cool. I'm here with the legend himself. But beyond that, you were playing a role with like early crypto venture infrastructure, and then we'll get to this in a little bit. You've also introduced this concept of smart agents a couple of years ago. So right now you're core contributor at Morpheus, which is, if people don't know, like this open source network for decentralized AI. And that's where the smart agents are living, thinking, transacting, coordinating without any centralized control. So today we're going to cover a wide range of stuff, from like decentralized applications all the way to modern decentralized intelligence, like with the smart agents. And most importantly, how Morpheus, a lot like Recall, is putting humans back at the center of AI. Okay. So to start us at the beginning, back at DApps like a decade ago, what parallels are you seeing there with smart contracts, decentralized applications, and now smart agents, which are way more non-deterministic in nature?
Well, it's funny. I appreciate all the kind words. It's weird because I wrote the DApps paper in my 20s, and now I'm like the old man of crypto, like 13 years later, running through the beard. No, it was sort of an effort to put freedom tech at the heart of everything people were building, and it was like, let's do what Bitcoin did. It's got to be open source. It's got to be peer to peer. It has to have a blockchain, and it needs its own token, so it can be independent and truly decentralized, right? And so that idea caught on, right? Ethereum ended up adopting that DApps terminology, right? The Ethereum white paper was a platform for smart contracts and decentralized applications. So that really kind of put a lot of fuel behind the concept. And I think it's played out pretty well. There's like $1 trillion of DApps now that have emerged in the ecosystem, which is wild to see people still spelling it like with the capitalization that I put in the white paper. It's kind of trippy. So, but it was a lot of fun, man. And I try to basically contribute with each layer of the technology stack as it's evolved. So, like the first, second layer projects, the first time, like we reach scalability. It's like where can I just push the needle a little bit, right, and make a dent in the universe. So yeah, it's been cool. But it was, I guess, 2023 when I found the Morpheus white paper, and it gave me, like, for the first time in a long time, there's like early Ethereum vibes, where it's like
Mm,
community built. There is no entity. It's all fair launch. There's no pre-mine. It's entirely sort of ground up. Like all these OGs were like, freedom of intelligence is going to be really important. I want to own my AI. I don't want to be owned by AI. Like I literally want to control my keys, my AI. Right. And people are going to learn that lesson. Like if they're not your keys, it's not your AI. And that's what I really want. That's why I spent so much time the last couple of years on this project.
yeah, let's make that connection there. So where I'll make like kind of a crude analogy, there are probably better ones already, where for people that want sovereignty over their own wealth, what are the traditional things? Maybe having some gold, for example, something that's not like US dollar denominated, like physical gold. And you can have that and just literally store it in your home, and you're solid, give or take, right? And in the LLM space, we might compare that to running a local LLM. I have it, it's mine, no one can take it away from me. But there are limitations there. Whereas Bitcoin came along and said, can we coordinate across people, but in a trust minimized, decentralized way that makes the whole thing stronger? So you're not solo, but you still have your sovereignty as you coordinate. And so the LLM equivalent here being like decentralized inference, for example, decentralized compute, decentralized training, a lot of people are tackling. So we get into those layers of like, okay, I want my sovereignty, but not in the like, what can I run on my 8 gigs of RAM kind of way. I want to be able to go in and out of participating without there being like one party that can turn it off or change its values, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the key point is when I read the Morpheus white paper, people had already been doing local installs. Like I had been working on this idea of smart agents, like let's connect a wallet to a local install. And now I have like a personal AI, but most people don't have a GPU. They don't have the powerful software. And the Morpheus guys came along and they're like, hey, this is great. Smart agents are the future, but there has to be a network. And for the average person, they're just going to use a light client, right? We see the same thing in Bitcoin and Ethereum. Only a few tens of thousands of people run a full node. Like anybody could, but it's a lot of hassle and you got to keep up with it. You have to have hardware. Most people interact with Bitcoin through a wallet. Most people experience Ethereum through MetaMask or something like that. And that's okay, right? Their private key is giving them that self sovereignty, but they're leveraging the consensus of the network to be able to transact whenever they want, right? So I want the same thing for AI. I want to hold my keys to control my AI and be able to access my agents, my data, my prompts, anywhere I go, and not be shoved into like one of these corporate walled gardens where like it doesn't talk to the rest of the world. It only talks to, chat GPT or whatever. And I can't take any of it with me. Like if my credit card expires, like I lose my AI, like that's crazy. We all carry around a smartphone because we want personal ownership of our information, our relationships, our context, our memories. Like this is literally my mind. Like I want to own these personal, intimate extensions
Yeah.
of my mind.
I was talking to a
And
friend of
so,
mine. She just today, she's like totally not terribly technically savvy. She works in a different industry. And she was like, oh, I've heard good things about Claude, but at this point, like ChatGPT knows so much about me. And I could just feel the pain. Like she doesn't understand how memories work, how easy or difficult it might be to export and import. Like talk about moat, right? It's this invisible layer. So for folks who don't know, maybe let's take a moment just to define like what is Morpheus's key design? Like what kind of key problem is it tackling? And then if you want to compare it to some other decentralized AI approaches in case people are like, or are you tackling similar or different problems from some other projects I might have heard of?
so that's a really good place to start. So Morpheus is supporting agent builders, right? In the same way that Ethereum supports smart contract builders, right? Somebody has to support the people that are going to create these smart agents and want to deploy them, and they have to run somewhere, they have to execute somewhere, they all need inference, right? So Morpheus has these different decentralized components, like from the decentralized inference marketplace. Like if you stake some more tokens to an agent, it'll run forever. Just like you take for granted you publish a smart contract on Ethereum and it's always going to be there, it's always going to execute. You need the same thing for agents, but not just for the inference. You need that for agentic tools. You need that for context. You need that for memories, right? So one by one, the community is building out like all these primitives, and there's a lot of hard work to do. Like there's so many good projects and stuff going on. Like let's take the work by Coinbase, right? Their agent kit and what they've done on like permissioning of the wallet. So you're not exposing your private key, but it's just authorizing this transaction for an agent. Like you have to make those connections, right? Or to X402, or Morpheus is involved in 8004, the new Ethereum standard for trustless agents. Like we need to pull in those aspects, like all the recall stuff with those important aspects, like who's tying them all together. You really need a platform just focused on that interoperability and that is neutral, right? And because Morpheus is multi-chain, it's natively a neutral platform, right? There's no pre-mine, there's no VCs, it's not owned by one protocol. It's sort of built up by the community. So it's already on a Ethereum base, Arbitrum, and next, who knows? Maybe the community will expand it to Solana or other chains, right? But everybody needs this common infrastructure. So that's probably the best way I'd say it is if you believe that the web is becoming this new agentic internet, how do you own a part of that? How do you participate in that? Like, how do you own your intelligence and access to that? And that's what Morpheus is really trying to do.
So I'm going to bookmark two things that I want to make sure people are crystal clear on before we go too much further. One is like, what does this kind of look like? Like to have a crude mental model. And we can either pick something more hello world, like somebody wants to ask an LLM what the weather is in their city. Okay, there's some tool calls there. You can imagine like what pieces are and aren't happening on Morpheus. I think that would help clarify. And then we'll come back to in a moment what you mentioned there about fair launch, just if people are kind of curious about the ecosystem shape. But let's just stick the landing here on the model. Like, let's say I'm one of these light client users and I'm interacting with some kind of a GUI, and somebody said, hey, I made an agent on Morpheus, come try it out. What's actually happening when they send that query?
So when they send that query, it goes into the API. So most developers are using the API gateway on Morpheus, which is just openbeta.more.org, MOR.org. And you can push a button, get a key, like no coding required, just one click, and then put that into your application, right? Whatever you're building. And so when a user calls and say, oh, I want to use Llama 3.3 to ask it a question, it's routing that inference into somebody providing that model. And that might be on Venice or Akash or one of these other GPU networks that provide inference. Morpheus is not running any GPUs. It's just an aggregation layer. It's just a router that is a set of smart contracts connecting the user to whoever's providing it, right? So we want to give that infrastructure for all the providers, and people are saying, oh, aren't you a competitor with XYZ? It's like, no, we're the customer. We're getting them users. Like we're
Okay.
to somebody else's deck.
Right.
Like, we're
So
routing it to their decks, right?
in the context of, because people that have been building with like OpenAI compatible endpoints, they're kind of used to that, where it's like, okay, I've got all of my logic, and then I just like shove a payload over to an LLM and say, what do you think? And you do all this wrapping, but that might include like a tool call. Or it might include sending it to the LLM, and then the LLM says, okay, before I respond, I'm going to go do a tool call because I see that's available to me. And they output like, hey, give me the weather, dude. So in that way, um, how does Morpheus handle things like those things that are complementary, right? Like in the smart contract world, this would be like oracles. Like oracles need data outside of smart contracts. What do we do? And then we have the Oracle solutions and the Oracle problem. So what does that design space look like on the Morpheus side?
So we're really not trying to change any behavior when it comes to an AI developer. It's the exact same format as OpenAI. So if you're already using their schema and the way that all of the outputs works, you don't have to change anything. Like it's 0 lines of code different. You just switch out the API key. And so now it's calling to the decentralized inference marketplace, right? So that's a good place to start. The second thing that's really interesting is Morpheus effectively gives a payment rail to everybody building agents. And so this is what Venice used Morpheus for, is if people staked more token, they got a free Venice Pro account. And that was like their first 4,000 or 5,000 users when they were bootstrapping the network. Now they're over 1 million users. Like it's amazing to see what they've done on the front end. But that's a really cool example of somebody building a project on Morpheus, using it to gain their initial community, their early adopters. And it's almost like an anti-Sybil mechanism. Like, how do you know your airdrop's going to real people instead of a bunch of bots? Well, having them stake is a pretty good way to know that they're real, right? And so, I think there's a lot of opportunity for people that are doing fair launches or airdrops or want to partner with a community that are like hardcore decentralized AI people, right? And that are excited about using additional tools in the community. We've seen a lot of that.
So, and then staying here with the token for a moment, I think the idea of a never-ending fair launch is somewhat novel. Some people might have ever heard of a fair launch. That's not even everyone. So, can you help explain a little bit, like how the token started and how it's going?
So, it's really clever. When I read the white paper, I was like, oh, this is like ICOs without an entity, without custody, without a risk vector. And so people just staked their Ethereum towards Morpheus, and it only contributed the yield to the protocol. And so they could withdraw their Ethereum whenever they wanted. After 7 days, they had full liquidity, and they had the same number of ETH that they started with, right? So it's like my principle is the same. I might as well stake towards a cool open source project that I want to support. So over $3 billion of staked Ethereum have gone through that process and staked towards Morpheus. And that's provided something like $10 million in yield to the protocol. But this competition never ends, because think about it this way. If you provided 1% of the yield today, you'd get 1% of the token emissions from today. So it's this constant competition that'll go the entire 16-year history of the initial emissions and then continue for the next 16-year epoch and the next and the next. And it kind of never goes away. And what's happening with that yield? It's all buying tokens out of Uniswap. So it's creating constant demand for the other people who earned the tokens from providing code or compute or builders who are making the agents, right? So you've got this constant bootstrapping mechanism for the token itself. And so it's not like an ICO, like they took in a bunch of money and then they run it down to zero and, oh, sorry guys, it didn't work out. Like it's more like Bitcoin mining, right? It's not going to stop. It's going to keep going. And this competition is going to continue over time. And we've just recently added integration with Aave. So now you can provide USDC, USDT, wrapped Bitcoin, wrapped Ethereum, these other assets, and direct the yield. So it's no longer just on Lido, it's open to anybody, whether you want to hold Bitcoin or ETH or stables, that's up to you, right? And so, yeah, I think that's a really novel approach. And a bunch of people have copied this. So if you saw AO from Arweave, they literally used the same Morpheus contracts right after they came out and have brought in a couple of $1 billion. So I don't know how much it's up to, like maybe $5 billion have gone through these contracts so far, but Noun Space and others have adopted as well.
Yeah, I just like this, it's about alignment, it's not like give me your money, I'm gonna go spend it. It's like, hey man, like take the yield, do something useful. Now you're a token holder, and by the way, we're all buying. Those are the kinds of, let's call it, incentive alignment mechanisms where I'm like, great, like this is slow and steady. It's the right people doing the right thing at the right pace. It's not aggressive, you know what I mean? So okay, so that helps explain where the more token is, that's like the beating heart, and then it of course exists to incentivize developers and builders and compute providers all the same. So let's talk about how, you mentioned it being kind of this aggregator layer or sitting on top or interconnecting other pieces. Let's talk about some of those other pieces. So as we get into the first innings of this, like agent to agent, you mentioned 8004. People are probably more familiar with A2A protocol, just agents being like, their little baseball card of like, I'm an agent, I'm good at crypto trading, and you can totally trust me because I say so. So you might have like, let's name some players in our stage play. Recalls there to help evaluate which ones are actually the best at whatever skills they're advertising they're capable of. You've got things like Filecoin for storing data and wrappers like Sriracha on top. Okay, so I know that the data is going to be there if the agents need it. You've got providers like Gaia and Akash and others or Eigen for the inference itself. A lot of times that looks like, an open source model where I just call an API and that's it. But then there's other kind of more specialized ways you can do it too. So how do you see people today starting to wire these things together, and where do you like envision that going, like let's say 6 months from now? What parts of that do you think will start to kind of coalesce and become more mature?
So it's a pretty cool ecosystem. We've held all these decentralized AI summits, and all the people you named, like those are the people at the events, whether it's Singapore, ETH Denver, whatever. So we sort of wanted to just bring together the community because 2 years ago, so much of this was just like white papers and ideas, and now it's real. Like the APIs are live, the agents are live, like the inference is live, it's happening. Um, a lot of the early use cases are existing things that people do. Like you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but I want an agent. I've set one up that reads my email and sends me a summary every day. I've set one up that does a meal plan every week and turns that into a shopping list, which then my wife can import into her app and hit the button. Right? Like there's just like so many average day jobs that I want to hand off to my agent. And so part of my dream is like, I end up with an agent, I express intent, it knows what I'm trying to do, and then it can look at recall and say, oh, here's the top agent for that type of job, right? And connect it in, not just randomly, like you're saying, but based on reputation, based on its identity, based on its proven history, right? So I think that ranking aspect is really important for how this works.
Yeah, I really look forward to that handoff becoming um, let's call it more standardized. We're already starting to see within silos. Like for example, we're still pretty early with sub-agent type stuff. Like I'm working in one context window, like a Claude Code, for example, and it's Claude Code. We know if you study this stuff, you know about context rot. Like the more it has to keep like, oh, let me try this. That wasn't quite it. Let me try this. Ooh, I found an error. That's just cluttering up your context window. So in a lot of cases, an agent wants to like go send a minion to do a specific thing and then report back the summary so that that main context window can be more pure and it can be more accurate as you go through a multi-turn situation. But in that world, this, let's call it the like one to many, the delegator, is going to need to be able to delegate to efficient things. And your example, like, okay, I might not be the best agent at meal planning. I'm going to go say, hey, meal planning agent, you claim to be good at it. Here's some context about David and this week and what's in his fridge. You tell me what we should do. And then it reports back. We're still super early. Like I know of very few examples of apps that are, you know, even Web 2 apps that are like wiring together cross agent, cross platform communication. I'm only seeing, you know, MCP got its legs. And then I'm personally really excited about this skills paradigm that Anthropic's pioneering, where it's like literally just a markdown doc. It's like the thing we've all been doing for a few years of like, hey, you're a really good marketer. Okay, write me a blog post. Like you can kind of elaborate, but like human language, English or any language is finally like the native code of this system. So I don't have any strong hunches here, but I'm really curious to see in that decentralized kind of way, lots of people will try writing different specs or system prompts of like, what does it mean to be the best meal planning agent? Like that probably means writing up in plain language like good best practices for meal planning, not like C++, right? So I look forward to seeing those kinds of things get like evaluated and ranked and rise to the top because people are going to be routing through Morpheus like here's my intent and we're just going to need like a proliferation of options and then a way to traverse that knowledge graph and then like to choose one. So I don't know. I just there's lots of ways this could play out is what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, and we're sort of, you know, because it's a neutral platform, we don't have to make the decision on behalf of users. If they want to use MCP, great. Like we indexed, I think, 6,000 MCP servers that are on GitHub and put up just a search tool, right? And we tweeted that out the other day, like, hey, if you want to find an agent, you don't have to scroll through GitHub. You can, you know, actually just search for the agent that does that thing, right? And like you said, it's a fairly small universe, right? And so there might only be 3 or 4 task agents or, you know, meal planning agents or whatever. But the competition is going to ramp up. Like the number of MCP servers has gone from dozens to hundreds of thousands, you know, to thousands in only a few months, right? I think what's happening effectively is the web went from websites to everybody wrapped it into an app, and now they're all turning into agents, right? That's this next wave of the web. And so everybody's rushing to figure it out. Is it MCP? Is it A to A? Is it using X402 to do the payment with a stable coin and a native web URL? Like, we're going to find out, but we're going to do the work to support those different standards and just let the market decide. Like, there'll probably be niches for each of the different ways of doing it, depending on the use case or the user. But you know, our job ought to be to just support builders and make sure that the tools they need are available.
So the last piece here, now that we've covered a lot about how this could look at the implementation level, let's talk about why it's happening. And in particular, Morpheus has some pretty strong stances compared to just like, yeah, you know, it's inference compute and it's got, you know, good latency or price or whatever the case may be. No, there's philosophical underpinnings here. So when, you know, you've in the past, you've said Morpheus is weaving humans into the heart of crypto and AI. So can you help us understand a little bit about what that means in practice?
That's one of my favorite quotes. I think I put that up on X a while ago, and it's like, I want the human at the heart, because if you listen to a lot of these people, they think like AI is going to run everything and make all the decisions. I don't want that reality. I want the one where the individual has the agency. And I've got different preferences and different values and different ethics than everybody else. And I want my AI to reflect that, right? And I think there's something deeply important about that. And if you look at any other area of human endeavor, when individuals and individual rights are respected, you get really good outcomes, right? Free markets provide a lot of prosperity. People have choice. Anytime you concentrate power and there's a couple central planners that know better than everybody else, like, you don't get good outcomes. And it's not because they're not well intentioned. It's because it's an information systems problem. They can't possibly know. Even the world's smartest AI doesn't know what I'm thinking, doesn't know my preferences, doesn't know the things I deeply care about, because I may have never publicly said them, right? They live in my head, right? And so that's the driver here, is I want the individual to make those choices. And so when they access an open source model, they're not giving up all of that information to some third party company, right? They're in charge of that data and they have access to it. And from a practical perspective, Web 2 has like made trillions of dollars off of our data, and most people have no concept of how much their data is worth. We're talking like tens of thousands of dollars per year per person. And they give you these free apps in exchange that are, maybe they're spending $100 a year giving you email or search or whatever else, but you're giving up 99% of the value. And we need to flip that equation. People might be okay selling some of their data if they got some of the value back. And I'm talking half the value or 75% of the value, not 1% of the value, right? And so that's, if you ever wanted to get to like a UBI, you'd actually be able to do it if it was a universal earned income and everybody has data, everybody has value, everybody can act as an oracle, So there's a lot of interesting models that can come out of this, but I really want to flip the script for where like we've given away all of our most important information and people ought to control that. Now we have the tools, right? It was very hard to do that before. Advertising was only one of the models that existed because there's no native internet payments. I couldn't pay 1 penny for something. And so I had to pay with 10 cents of my attention to an advertiser instead. But now we have those rails, right? There are trillions of dollars of stablecoin transactions. X402 puts that in an easy, web native context. So I'm pretty optimistic we can sort of reinvent these models, which I don't think have been serving us very well, with much better models going forward.
Yeah, every time I see an ad, I'm like, just give me a cut. Like, you're making me look. It's the attention economy. Brave, right? For people that are familiar with Brave's attention token. Okay, you show me a literal ad, I get a literal cent, that's fine. But as we move into an LLM first UI, I think for people that have thought about it for a moment, it's pretty clear that the major providers are going to start doing, let's call it paid placement for their answers, right? Like, what is the best dog shampoo? Well, no surprise that some brands might be tipping the scales by paying the major providers to rank their answer more highly in that inference graph. And that's invisible, right? We just take the answers we get back as like truth or like data in that way that a chart is just sort of implicitly convincing, even if, anyone can make any chart to convey any point. So, okay, if we're going to do that, like if I'm going to ask an LLM to go traverse some knowledge graph and it's going to give me back answers, let me toggle on or off, like just, okay, like out of the 4 results, show me 2 that are just trying to get in front of my eyeballs and pay me for that. And then, or my inference is free, like these kinds of things. It's just so on the table as a design space that I want to see people having those options and seeing what we do with it. But beyond the mechanisms here, just to land our plane. So we started at the beginning by talking about how you've been here for over a decade. You helped define like the era of decentralized applications and DApps, and now you're contributing to Morpheus and shaping this age of decentralized intelligence. So smart agents are already starting to coordinate our digital world. How do you think we can like work to ensure that we are expanding human freedom in those choices rather than like automating it away? You spoke to this a moment ago. How do we keep the spirit of collaboration at the core of what we're building instead of fancy automations that just make it so I don't have to think?
That's a really good question. I think that's the key, is where do I express agency, right? Where do I get the opportunity to, clearly define what I want and what's valuable to me? And so I think that's part of what Morpheus has coming forward in sort of a context marketplace or a context storage marketplace is I want to be able to persistently store my human context, right? And it's not just which apps I'm using and which agents I'm using. Like I would answer 100 questions about like what I care about, and I want that to be, prioritized and ranked when it thinks about how to align with what I'm trying to really achieve, right? It's the old paperclip problem. Like you can give it a high level task and it'll like go and, but in the absence of like understanding what we really value, we value more than just optimizing more paperclip production. We care about humans. We care about our kids. We care about our memories and values we have. So again, I think it goes back to being able to capture that context, own it personally, and then meld that with my AI. When it does things on my behalf, it's got that context, and so it knows what I care about. But yeah, I mean, the alternative is pretty dystopian. Like I was doing a Google search the other day for doctor offices, and it basically misled me. I thought I was getting a certain doctor's office. I clicked on the result, and I hadn't seen that they're now shoving the ads into the Google map results. And so it was redirecting me to somebody who had paid on the other side of town, like an hour away, to say like, oh, you should use this doctor instead. But I had no idea that that had happened. I was like confused. It's like, I thought it was like a mile away. Why is it across town? And like I'm calling them and they're not picking up. And I finally realized like, oh, it tricked me into like trying to go to the wrong doctor. It's like, I never want that. Like there's no amount of money that is like going to convince me that's a good outcome. Like, so yeah, I really want that choice. Like you're saying, the choice is the key. Like if I consent to it, it's something, that I want to accomplish, then that's fine. But, people can make different choices and that's okay. But I want that option. I want that transparency. I want to know what's happening. Otherwise, yeah, we're just going to get farmed by 200 IQ agents that are constantly not even trying to scam you, but persuade you or, advertise. It's a little propaganda.
I
Just a
know.
little moving the needle. So yeah, no, so I almost need like an agentic firewall. And that's how I think of Morpheus, is I need an agent that is interacting with the other agents on my behalf that will say, oh, that's a scam. That's, a phishing link. That's an advertisement, right? And at least gives me that information. We take this for granted with like Google, like Gmail. You remember like the early days, here's your, Nigerian prince scam or whatever. I don't see those emails anymore because they do such a good job of sort of creating that firewall to protect their users, and they're constantly scanning the emails for that type of attack. Like I need that for agents, and I don't need that like a year from now. Like people are already deep faking and calling my friends and family and pretending to me like right now. Like the videos have gotten that good, and so I use Signal and I can use encrypted chat to know it's me, but they really need an agent because they are not familiar with all these attack vectors, and it's going to be a hell of a lot easier to build people personal AI that protects them than try to educate 8 billion humans on all these attack vectors.
Yeah, amen, and well said. It's a fast moving world, and I'm looking forward to us all doing our part to contribute to making it a little bit better, a little bit easier to navigate, a little bit safer, a little bit easier to just get things done and find the best agent for whatever you're trying to do. Do that in a fair way without being taken advantage of or spied on or sold something. Well, thank you so much, David, for your time today. Is there anything else, speaking of agency and choice, is there anything that you would like to let people know they can choose to do? Any particular call outs to builders or community members you want to make before we wrap?
So yeah, I mean, if you're building agents or just want to use inference, just go to openbeta.more.org and you can check that out. If you just want to check it out from like a user perspective or capital, it's just more.org or more.org. Follow us on X, all that kind of regular stuff. But I don't think there's anything more important people can do right now than understand how to control and own their own intelligence, right? And so lean in, spend some time, learn about it, and check out Recall, check all the people in this ecosystem that are really pioneering these tools. You can be for your family what like early Bitcoiners were, educating about honest money and transparent systems. Like they made a real impact on their family, and we're going to need to do that again this time for decentralized intelligence.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again for taking the time to join me today. If people want to know more, like you said, more.org, recall.network.